This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
Back to basics. Why this summer week taught us a lot about the U.S. economy and what it might mean for the Federal Reserve and your money. Long road ahead. The U.S. flag is raised at the embassy in Havana. But there's still a long way to go before economic relations are normalized. All American. Why our market monitor is investing in companies that do most of their business right here in the U.S.A. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Friday, August 14th. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Tyler Matheson. Sue Herrera has the evening off. Well, this August week was anything but a summer snoozer. Over the past few days, we learned that the world's largest economy, ours, remains resilient, though far from firing on all cylinders. Manufacturing is improving in the face of a strong dollar and falling oil prices. The consumer is spending, the job market is strengthening, and the stock market rebounded after China devalued its currency earlier this week and really all week long. Today, we got additional information on the state of the economy, bringing investor attention back to good old-fashioned fundamentals.
It's a familiar story, but it paints a muddled picture. On the bright side, the U.S. economy is growing. Two key numbers out today confirm it. The Producer Price Index, or PPI, up 0.2%, and industrial production also higher, 0.6%, both up more than expected. But whether the U.S. economy is moving fast enough to justify an interest rate hike by the Federal Reserve, well, that is another question.
If they're going to move, it's once or twice, and it's only to move off of zero and to stay silent next year in the election period.
Remember, when we take a step back and look at this on an annual basis, the PPI is still very much in negative territory, as it has been now for the 7th consecutive month. So still no signs of upward pressure, no immediacy for the Fed to react.
In fact, producer prices are actually down almost 1% compared with a year ago, and the rise in July was a smaller jump than we saw in June, so the rate of growth slowed down. Even core prices, excluding both food and the reeling energy sector, are up only 0.6% over a year. So we're still a long way from any signs of the 2% inflation the Fed says it's looking for. Industrial production is also showing some weakness. Peel back the headline number and you'll find that almost all the growth came from autos and auto parts manufacturing, up more than 10%. Strip out autos, and manufacturing, which accounts for most of the industrial production number, was barely higher, 0.1%, and there were downward revisions to the June number. What's more, the Fed has to consider the stronger U.S. dollar. That cheapens imports and slows our exports. Then there's the weak energy sector and a generally bumpy global economy. Earlier this week, China devalued the yuan. Today, the European Union announced it missed second quarter GDP forecasts and also revised its first quarter number down 0.1 point. The U.S. consumer may be feeling a pinch too, even with a good July retail number this week. Consumer sentiment dropped below 93 in early August after a slight uptick had been expected. Of course, it's still summertime. The living may be easy, even if the data for now looks choppy enough to make the Fed reach for the Dramamine.
Well, that economic data sent stocks higher to finish the week. By the close of trading today, the Dow Jones Industrials rose 69 points to 17,477. NASDAQ climbed 14, S&P higher by 8. For the week, which was filled with volatility, believe it or not, all three major averages rose by just a bit. Well, investors are pulling their money from U.S. equity funds. Morningstar reports outflows through July are running at the highest level since 1993. And as the money flows out of U.S. funds, it's going into international funds. It's also moving out of actively managed ones and into passive or index funds. Well, the U.S. has approved limited sales of crude oil to Mexico. The Commerce Department has told lawmakers that it will approve an application by Mexico's national oil company. The application would allow Mexico to enter into oil trade agreements with U.S. companies. The energy industry has been pushing to relax Washington's restrictions on oil exports, which have been in place for decades. Today, nonetheless, oil prices rose slightly to $42.50 a barrel. Well, it was an historic day, more than 50 years in the making. The American flag was raised above a new U.S. embassy in Cuba, symbolizing the restoration of diplomatic and economic relations between the two countries. But as Michelle Caruso-Cabrera reports from Havana, there's still a lot of hard work ahead.
The defining moment of today's event, when the three Marines who lowered the flag for the last time back in 1961 raised the flag today at what is now once again the U.S. Embassy here in Havana. John Kerry became the first U.S. Secretary of State to visit the island since 1945. In his speech, which was broadcast on national Cuban television, he said that the U.S. and Cuba are not rivals, not enemies, but rather neighbors. He once again repeated the president's request to eliminate the U.S. embargo against the island and at the same time welcomed American business executives' interest in trying to do business here despite that embargo.
We are encouraged that more and more U.S. companies are exploring commercial ventures here that would create opportunities for Cuba's own rising number of entrepreneurs.
Many of those invited and in attendance were those who have worked to improve relations between Cuba and the U.S. for the last several years. And there were also many Cuban-American business people as well, including former Commerce Secretary Carlos Gutierrez, the former CEO of Kellogg's. He was born here in Havana, Cuba, and today's trip was his first since 1960.
This morning I woke up and I was joyful, I was happy to wake up in Havana. And this was incredibly emotional to see our flag coming up in Havana again, having Cubans applaud.
And despite today's watershed moment, there is still a long road ahead before there's full normalization between the two countries. Once again, the Cuban government today called for the end of the embargo against the country, but it doesn't look like there's enough votes in Congress for that to happen anytime soon. And even if the embargo were to go away, this is a communist country, and it's still incredibly difficult to do business here. In Havana, Cuba, Michelle Caruso-Cabrera, Nightly Business Report.
Meanwhile, in Brussels, members of the European Commission said they reached an agreement to lend Greece the equivalent of $96 billion in bailout funds over 3 years. The deal followed approval by Greek lawmakers of austerity measures that were needed to get that bailout money. And now to China, where investors have been watching the government's move to devalue its currency this week. Small importers and exporters have also taken notice. They can be very sensitive to currency swings because they typically have fewer resources to handle the impact. And for some, China's currency devaluation may be both a blessing and a curse. Kate Rogers explains.
Raymond Arth is manager of the Phoenix Faucets division of Valterra Products, LLC, located in Avon Lake, Ohio. Phoenix makes 40% of its gross sales revenue from imported faucets and plumbing products, mainly from China. If the yuan devaluation continues, it may mean better leverage for trade deals going forward.
What we're seeing here is more evidence of weakness in the Chinese economy. And they have really been facing some challenges over the last couple of years, which has left the manufacturers, the people we're dealing with, working very hard to be aggressive with their pricing. What that means for me as we go forward is, as a buyer, I may have more leverage with the suppliers because they don't have as much business activity as they did, and we may, with the stronger dollar, be able to negotiate better deals.
While small business advocacy groups say a continued decline in the Chinese currency will benefit importers of Chinese products, the downside to that is a potential hit on Made in America manufacturing.
American-made products are going to be a lot more expensive in China to buy, which puts U.S. exporters at a competitive disadvantage, and I think can also potentially lead to an even widening of our already large trade deficit that we have with China.
This is a concern of Arth's, as 60% of his product line is manufactured here in the States. The yuan devaluation puts him in a scenario where his two product lines are in competition with one another.
The gap widens between my low price entry point, which is an imported product, and the Phoenix-made products that are produced in our factory. Customers will tend to move to buy the lower price product. So it actually, while I get the benefit of buying lower price components and finished assemblies, because it competes with my other product lines, my domestic faucets will probably see some erosion in sales as customers move to the lower price offering.
So as the global markets continue to monitor the yuan decline, so too do some American small businesses. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Kate Rogers.
Still ahead, the big money behind some of the biggest state fairs in the country. Ford is dropping one of the most popular mutual funds of all from its retirement accounts for employees. The automaker pulling an estimated $900 million from Fidelity's Contra fund, a fund that's found in many retirement accounts. In a statement, Ford said it makes changes from time to suit the needs of its employees. Well, Iowa is hosting one of the largest state fairs in the country. And while it may conjure images of deep-fried foods like fried butter and amusement rides, this time-honored Midwestern tradition is also big business for state associations and local shops. Morgan Brennan is at the center of it all in Des Moines.
Fried food and politicians.
They look pretty good to me.
This is the Iowa State Fair. With roughly 1 million visitors each year, it's one of the biggest in the country.
Of those million people that come to the Iowa State Fair, many of them come and stay in the surrounding area, and they, of course, drive here and utilize our local businesses in addition to the fair. We estimate it's over $100 million worth of impact in the 11 days.
Even though they're not-for-profit entities, state fairs are a big business, with the largest racking up tens of millions of dollars in revenue, including sales for local entrepreneurs and statewide associations like the corn farmers and cattle ranchers. In Iowa, officials have been taking steps to make sure the fair stays strong.
In this last legislative session, the Senate, the House, the governor all agreed to make sure that the school start date, none of the school districts can start school until after the state fair is over.
Western apparel retailer Western Edge has 2 booths at Iowa's fair.
We like coming here because there's so many people here, and then we're advertising, and hopefully they will be coming to our stores in the future.
And of course, politicians like to come here too, since the state holds the first caucus or major electoral event in the nominating process for president. Groups gather around the hay bale stacked soapbox that hosts candidates, and Iowans line up at the Cast Your Kernel booth to vote with corn kernels on who will be the next commander-in-chief.
Fairgoers want to meet them, and I think it does drive the attendance.
While the Iowa State Fair is the campaign grounds of presidential hopefuls, including earlier this morning GOP candidate Jeb Bush, when it comes to making money at the fair, it is all about the food.
It's very hot, so be careful.
There's a waiting list for booth space, and food vendors can rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue in less than 2 weeks. If it's on a stick, it's likely to sell, be it corn dogs, cheese, salad, or a local favorite, pork chop on a stick, of which the Pork Association expects to go through 67,000. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Morgan Brennan in Des Moines, Iowa.
I am now very hungry. Well, investors cheer J.C. Penney on better than expected results, and that is where we begin tonight's market focus. The retailer did post a loss, but it was narrower than expected. Revenue beat forecasts, as did its increase in same-store sales, and that added up to a good day in the market for JCP. Shares rose 5.5% to $8.52. Warren Buffett eliminated his stakes in National Oil Well Varco and Phillips 66. According to a filing, the move signals that Buffett could have another large investment in the works. Clearing the decks, shares of National Oil Well fell a fraction to $39.55. Phillips 66 was also down slightly to $82.30. Lumber Liquidators rose after Tiger Management disclosed in a filing that it is taking a new stake in that flooring maker. The firm's nearly 240,000 share position is welcome news for investors following allegations that some of the flooring sold there contains a known carcinogen. Shares were nearly 8% higher today to $14.02. And Nelson Peltz's Trian Funds revealing it has taken a more than 7% stake in the food services fund Cisco. The position, worth more than $1.5 billion, would make Trian the largest shareholder in the company, and this according to reports. Shares were 7.5% higher to $41.38. And with all of the uncertainty overseas, how can you protect your portfolio? Tonight's Market Monitor has 3 picks that he says are safe amid all the volatility. This is his first appearance on Nightly Business Report. And so we welcome Mark Spellman, Portfolio Manager at Alpine Funds. Mark, good to have you with us. I note in my notes that you have 2 principal concerns. One is how the market may react in the short term if and when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates. And the other is slowing global growth. How do you meld the two and come up with a portfolio strategy?
Yeah, I think this week for sure, the emphasis has been on slowing global growth. The actions by the Chinese government has clearly shown they're very worried, and that has global implications in the area. They're trading partners in Japan. Also with commodity prices, energy, metals, that's all the worry. That's why in our Alpine Equity Income Fund, we are really trying to concentrate on companies that derive most of their revenues here in the U.S. and also pay a dividend and are going to raise that dividend going forward.
So stay close to home and look for dividends. After all, as you point out, you're an equity income fund. Let's go through a couple of your choices. Discover Financial is one of them. You have a target price of $72 a share.
Yeah, I think the bottom line with Discover, it's just extremely cheap at 10 times earnings. When you look at the Dodd-Frank stress test that took place earlier this year, this company ranked #1 of all companies, all financial institutions. So that's going to help you sleep well at night. This is a company that's raising its dividend, buying back 8.5% of its shares. We think they're going to do the same thing next year. It's also almost exclusively U.S. revenue. It benefits from an improving U.S. consumer, higher disposable income. We really like the name here.
Let's talk about CBS Corp. You got a target there of 64 over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, the space of media has been really beaten up. And I think CBS has gotten beaten up a little too much compared to some of its rivals. It doesn't have the kind of exposures they have. It does have ad exposure. But this is a terrific network. They have what everybody wants, content. So if you're worried about the slimming down of cable bundles, CBS is going to be there. And they also have football. They have the Super Bowl this year. They have a lot of content that people want. They're also buying back a lot of stock. They just raised their dividend 25%. At 14 times earnings is another stock we think has a lot of upside.
And one of the best executives running it in Les Moonves. Let's go to Kinder Morgan. You got a target price there of 40.
Yeah, another proverbial baby out with the bathwater. We all know what's happened in the energy sector over this past year. However, this is a company that is the largest transportation pipeline company in North America. Very little of its earnings and revenue are derived from commodity prices. This is a fee and volume business, and there's a lot of volume. This is a company that has a 6% dividend yield. Not only do we think this dividend is safe, we think it's going to run up another 10% for the next couple of years. And the other thing I really like about this company, when a stock gets hit the way this is done, this management team and the board of directors, since the middle of June, have bought back they've bought $30 million of stock in the open market for their own accounts. That's a really good sign that they're really confident in what's going to happen going forward.
Putting their money to work in their own place, that's good. That is a good sign. Mark Spellman, thank you very much with Alpine Funds. And coming up, can Disney turn the force into cold, hard cash for the company and shareholders? Shares of Disney, along with lots of media stocks, may have taken a beating recently, but they are still up about 20% over the past year. And today, thousands of Disney fans were on hand to see what new offerings the company has planned. Jane Wells reports from Anaheim.
He transported us to a galaxy far, far away, and there was no looking back.
Of all the things the Walt Disney Company wants to celebrate this weekend at its fan event D23, none match the anticipation around Star Wars. The Force Awakens will awaken in theaters in December, the first big screen Star Wars movie under the Disney banner. And today, George Lucas was honored.
Not very many people realize that Goofy was the inspiration for Jar Jar Binks. I know you'll look at him differently now, because it's pretty obvious, actually.
Investors hope to learn more about Disney's plans to further monetize Star Wars, like the possibility of converting Toontown at Disneyland into a Star Wars area more tomorrow-like than Tomorrowland. Even Star Wars music is getting high praise as legendary composer Danny Elfman paid tribute to the even more legendary John Williams, who has scored every Star Wars film ever made.
Of course, you know, he is separate from all of us. There's the film composers, and then there's John Williams. And, you know, he's incredible.
The Star Wars event will be the big event of the weekend. And even though there is a disturbance in the force right now in the Chinese economy, box office expectations for this movie when it comes out in December are galactic.
Isn't that fantastic?
There is more to talk about, like Disney's huge investment in a park in Shanghai, given the Chinese economy. What's up next for Marvel, a branch of Disney which had almost no presence this year at Comic-Con? And good news for friends of Buzz and Woody. John Lasseter will be directing Toy Story 4 in 2017. There will also be an Incredibles 2 and a sequel to Frozen.
We only make sequels if we come up with a story that's as good or better than the original. That's our rule.
Finally, it's also a weekend to remember those who've made a huge impact on the company and remember the past, when Walt Disney created something very unique a long time ago in an imagination far, far away. For Nightly Business Report, Jane Wells, Anaheim.
And from Anaheim, we now head north to the beautiful Monterey Peninsula, Pebble Beach, where some of the most expensive cars in the world are on display and up for auction. Robert Frank went to take a look at some of those very classic cars.
It is the richest car week in the world. The Concours d'Elegance here in Pebble Beach is where millionaires and billionaires gather to party, show off their rides, and buy cars that cost more than most houses. Lot 104. This year, more than $400 million worth of cars will be auctioned off, and more than 140 cars will sell for more than $1 million. Ferrari, McLaren, Porsche, and other luxury companies will hold exclusive dinners and events for their top customers. Wall Streeters, real estate tycoons, tech founders, and European heiresses all fly in for these big 3 days.
Well, this is a...
Jay Leno has been coming to the Concours for decades and says there are now more international buyers, and the prices have skyrocketed as the rich buy these cars more as investments than just toys.
Oh, I've been coming here since the 80s. What's really changed is the investment potential of the cars. I mean, you could buy... Well, I'll give you an example. There was a guy in Long Island that had the $1 million car museum. He had $1 million worth of cars, and he had 250 cars. Now you'd have one car in that museum, maybe on jacks with the wheels missing, you know, because, I mean, that's how crazy it's gotten.
But some wonder whether the collectible car craze is a bubble that's getting ready to pop. Prices for top cars have more than doubled over the past 3 years, and there are now more and more speculators entering the market purely to buy cars for investment gains rather than to drive.
The concern in the marketplace is just, are they going to drive values through the roof and, you know, really kind of create that frothy, speculative environment that will make people pretty nervous.
Among the top cars being sold this week, the Pope's Ferrari, a 2005 Enzo that was given to Pope John Paul II and then auctioned off to charity. Last night, it sold for $5.5 million. The Ferrari Testarossa used on the Miami Vice TV show in the 1980s could sell for up to $1 million. And the last car purchased by Steve McQueen, the actor and racing legend, is also being sold. It's a 1976 Porsche Turbo Carrera that could top $1 million.
And the most expensive car this week could be this 1961 Ferrari California Spider, expected to sell for between $16 and $18 million. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Robert Frank in Pebble Beach.
I think the lesson is buy a Ferrari. That's a Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Tyler Matheson. We want to remind you this is the time of year public TV seeks your support. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we will see you here on Monday.